Hello, welcome to the digital fireside series of World Salon X. Topic for today is US-China's tech showdown. Deepseek's disruptive AI sparks a new global race. We're going to be looking at tech innovation, policy, and supply chains. I'll start with a brief introduction to myself, and then I'll hand it over to my co-panelists to allow them to introduce themselves. My name is Eduardo Albrecht. I'm an adjunct professor at Columbia University and a senior fellow at United Nations University Center for Policy Research. I'm a political anthropologist and I work across government, nonprofit, academic, and multilateral organizations. My research focuses on uses of artificial intelligence in state and international organization decision-making processes. I recently finished a book called Political Automation. It's published with Oxford University Press, and it's out this month. And it's a comparative introduction to uses of AI in governance around the globe, including China, the United States, Europe, Africa, India, and its impact on citizens. I'll hand it over now to Massimiliano Squilasce to introduce himself. I believe Massimiliano is having some technical difficulties joining, so I'll hand it over now to William Haynes.
Thank you. So I'm William Hannes. I'm with Georgetown University, where I'm a research professor, and I'm the lead analyst of Georgetown's Center for Security and Emerging Technology. We've been in existence now for 6 years. We started with, I'm one of the founding 3 members. We're up to 60 right now, and we're the quintessential Washington, D.C. think tank. We're focused on our ability to influence national policy and policymakers in particular. Our mission is to detect and try to mitigate existential threats to humanity, in particular those posed by artificial intelligence. Other things we look at are other critical technologies are bio and cyber and advanced computing. There's a limit to what we can do with our 60 people, but these are the technologies we've chosen to focus on with AI in particular. And prior to that, I was with the Central Intelligence Agency for some 29 years, doing pretty much the same thing I am right now, and that's using open sources to try to understand Chinese science and technology, what's happening there. So we've published a number of articles, studies, my colleagues and I, on China AI. Most recently, a book, I can't remember the title, Chinese Power and Artificial Intelligence. It's a co-edited book that looks at a number of different problems that have surfaced with China AI. So I'm happy to join you today and eager to get going.
William Hannes, I apologize for mispronouncing your last name there. I promise I won't get it wrong going forward. Henry, over to you.
Thanks so much. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Henry Sanderson. I'm an author, journalist, focused on clean energy in China. I'm the author of a book called Fault Rush, The Winners and Losers in the Race to Go Green, which talks about the scramble for critical minerals, batteries, and the geopolitical competition that comes with the shift towards clean energy and away from fossil fuels. I'm an associate fellow at the RUSI think tank in London, and I was formerly a journalist for Financial Times and for Bloomberg in Beijing for a number of years, where I lived in Beijing for 7 years. So looking forward to this conversation.
Great, fantastic. I'll go straight into it by answering the question that was created for me. And if Massimiliano manages to join, then I'll go over to him. But in the meantime, I'll start with my question. So the question that the organizers have posed for me to reply to is, drawing from my dual roles in academia and policy, what practical steps can governments and international bodies take to balance national security concerns with the need for open collaboration in AI research and development, especially with rival powers. Now, I'd like to start with pointing out that I believe we're at a critical inflection point in how nations approach AI development. There's been sort of a kind of a Pollyannish period that we've lived in recent decades, and we're now coming into a sort of maturity around the seriousness of AI technologies and their impact on national security. This is rather normal. We see that governments often tend to oscillate between protectionist reflexes and a recognition that scientific advancement thrives on openness. So not just in AI, but in many other sectors, we see that there's a sort of a rise and fall in the general attitude that governments have towards protecting their critical sectors. I would like to put forward a few guiding principles that can help perhaps frame the issue for us in this particular historical moment. The first is that I'd like to emphasize that we need differentiated governance frameworks that distinguish between types of technologies. So different applied versions of AI, different deployment contexts. Not all AI research requires the same level of security concern. You can imagine, for example, quantum computing with its implications around quantum cryptography requires one level, while perhaps the development of AI agents that seem to be poised to replace a lot of the tasks that regular workers do might require more collaboration as they are deployed in corporations and businesses that operate across borders. So perhaps AI agents is one place where collaboration is to the betterment of all. Another point that I'd like to emphasize is that we should establish secure research environments where we can that function as a kind of scientific diplomatic zones. So if we can imagine perhaps I work at the United Nations University, that'd be one place where we could have a university system where the United Nations provides some kind of infrastructure that would allow collaboration amongst nations. But this is just one example. There are many such organizations in international organizations, but also in the private sector and also nationally that could provide these kind of, as I call them, scientific diplomatic zones, a little bit like free economic zones do for trade and industry. Thirdly, I believe that it's very important to focus on harmonizing standards, technical standards, especially where interoperability is a requirement for scaling. So AI companies from any nation require interoperability at a certain point to be able to access markets at scale. So that's one area in which collaboration is necessary despite potential geopolitical tensions. A fourth area would be to create reciprocity mechanisms. Now, these can be operationalized through formal agreements, but the idea is that there has to be a mutual benefit for all involved. And these type of reciprocity mechanisms, we're starting to see them develop the first sort of embryonic forms. There's a lot of discussion, for example, in the OECD around how OECD countries may be able to establish these forms around AI development. Another a fifth element would be the multilateral oversight bodies that are required when it comes to creating agreed norms. Now, norms are actually easier, quite ironically, to arrive at than full out treaties, because a norm is a sort of a more broad strokes agreement around what are ethical and unethical uses, for example, of AI. And we are in fact seeing that that different bodies are starting to provide these agreed upon norms around AI. One example is the United Nations AI Advisory Body that put together a diverse group of experts from many different nations, including China, United States, Russia, Europe, Africa, the Global South. It's very important to include those voices as well, so that we have an inclusive um, uh, oversight body that can allow that reciprocity and that harmonization over technical standards and interoperability that I spoke about. Finally, the need for some kind of ethical guidelines when it comes to AI is very important, especially since we, in a way, would like to perhaps avoid the Brussels effect, where we have certain regional organizations like the EU that take the lead in creating AI standards, for example, the EU AI Act, and then other nations sort of catch up where they can to those standards, primarily for business reasons, but don't live formally under the same rules. So we need something that is more comprehensive in order to avoid that kind of patchwork global system where we have certain areas that are spearheading ethical guidelines, while other areas operate more as a kind of AI Far West, where anything goes and the population is used as a kind of testing ground for different forms of innovation. Now, that may work in the short term, but I believe that over the long term, it's in everybody's interest to have clearer ethical guidelines that are created in an inclusive manner. And that's where we need multilateral oversight bodies. So that, in a nutshell, is where I'm coming from in terms of balancing national security and open collaboration in AI. But I'll stop there, and I see that Basimio has not joined us yet, so I'll now ask Henry Sanderson his question. Henry, your analyses of commodity markets reveal how resource availability can sway technological progress. With the US-China AI race heating up, do you see vulnerabilities in material and hardware supply chains that could disrupt AI development, and how might each nation mitigate these risks?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think when you look at all these technologies, they do all rely at the end of the day on raw materials and on supply chains. And I think what we've realized over the last few years since COVID is the importance of these supply chains, the importance of raw materials that previously few people paid attention to. And what we see at the moment, especially with clean energy, which I focus on, but if you think about AI, it's going to need a lot of energy. It's going to need a lot of clean energy to be built, and potentially other forms of energy, nuclear, potentially nuclear fusion going forward. So if we see what is happening at the moment is we see this Deepseek moment in China, where everyone in China is rushing to use Deepseek AI. And we've seen electric car makers like BYD say they're going to use Deepseek. We've seen Chinese car companies talk about putting out level 3 autonomous vehicles. This is where you can take your hands off the wheel, check your email. You don't have to be, when I drive my electric car at the moment, even on autonomous mode, you have to keep your hands on the wheel and you're reminded to do so. But level 3, you can relax. They're talking about launching those models this year in China. So what all this is going to do is potentially really stimulate demand in these supply chains that maybe then increase the cost of raw materials, increase the pressure on these supply chains. And we saw this about two years ago in the battery supply chain, where prices for lithium went sky high. They've since fallen about 80%. But when they were super high, we saw the cost of batteries actually go up, which then had a whole load of ramifications, denting demand, slowing down global demand. And also China controls a lot of these supply chains. So there were fears about would Western companies get access to a lot of these minerals. So I do think we are going to see electric vehicle adoption really accelerate now in China, because buyers are attracted by some of these autonomous features, the integration with this AI. But that could increase demand, put pressure on these supply chains. And we could see, certainly in clean energy, we could see that prices may go up, or that Western companies might not get access to certain technologies. And just to be clear, if you talk about something like batteries, China is very, very dominant, and we need these big batteries to co-locate with renewable energy to often power these data centers. And China makes pretty much almost 100% of these batteries that are used for big energy storage on electricity grids. So, yeah, if demand increased, we could see pressure on this supply chain.
Super. Thank you very much, Henry. William, my question for you is, in your recent CSET commentary, Deepseek shows why US-China can still collaborate on tech. You highlight meaningful areas of cross-border innovation. Where do you see the greatest immediate opportunities for cooperation in AI, and how might these projects build trust amidst intensifying competition?
Thank you. Let me start by saying that the Newsweek publisher, and this will not be a surprise to any of us, changed the title of the original submission we had to emphasize cooperation, whereas the original also talked about the confrontation as well. So that aside, I'm going to take a contrarian view and push back a little bit on three of this seminar's assumptions, namely that Deepseek merits the attention it's been getting, that cooperation per se is a legitimate goal, and that substantial exchanges are not already happening. So as we see it, Deepseek's products are not China's only, earliest, or most important large language models. In fact, there were some 300 large language models in China by late 2024, including the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Automation's world-class multimodal Zidong Taichu, which, like Deepseek, also has artificial general intelligence AGI aspirations. Moreover, Deepseek's models, they owe a lot to prior art, and the fanfare surrounding their release neglects the company's earlier investments, which it's a remarkable achievement, but perhaps somewhat less spectacular than we had imagined. Now, that aside, their emergence did teach the United States and the world some valuable lessons, namely the gap in AI between the US and China is less than imagined. That scaled up models may not be the only or even the most viable path forward. Third lesson, that the US and its allies lack a reliable system to track China's AI progress. And finally, that China and the US are indeed in a race to build artificial general intelligence, which is Deepseek's the company's major goal. And this last point requires some elaboration. Some years after he wrote the book, I guess it was a bestseller, Superintelligence, AGI theorist Nick Bostrom, formerly at Oxford, considered two forms of governance for global AI safety: a consortium of stakeholders bound together by their mutual interest in preventing a runaway AI existential event, and a Pax Americana or Pax Sinica arrangement whereby one country reigns as the world's AI hegemon and ensures the technology does not get out of hand. Bostrom, correctly in my view, gave the former possibility a low chance of success and came down in favor of a benevolent hegemon, preferably one with liberal democratic values. Given the likelihood that powerful AI will quickly morph into super AI, super artificial intelligence, whoever gets there first may be first eternally. And I would much rather that it be us. In other words, the goal is to win, but to do so without driving the other side to desperation, and I'm not sure how to do that. So where does that leave collaboration? So I would point out there already is and has been a substantial amount of collaboration between China and Western countries in the form of one-sided technology transfers. For decades, China has operated a broad spectrum of foreign tech acquisition venues and initiatives with and without host country knowledge or consent, which have contributed massively to China's near-peer status in science and technology, AI included. These processes are well documented, not subject to debate, and will certainly continue. So given this reality, it may be time to make collaboration a two-way street. For example, China solicits foreign scientists, including ethnic returnees and U.S. researchers who are frustrated by shrinking grants and employment opportunities, to set up shop in China. The United States, for its part, has been hell-bent on chasing Chinese scientists out of the country, whose aggregate contribution to the United States exceeds the marginal loss of intellectual property by orders of magnitude. The United States government should be doing everything it can to ease the entry and retention of top foreign experts, including fast-tracking citizenship, while taking common sense precautions to prevent unwanted leakage. Secondly, China's view toward AI, and the AGI in particular, differs markedly from the prevailing view in the West, which is fixated on large generative models to the point where other potential paths to artificial general intelligence are ignored. Not so in China. Besides its work on large Deepseek-like models, China is pursuing alternative approaches to powerful AI, such as embodied systems, cognitive augmentation through brain-computer interfaces, and models that are based more closely on neuroscience. At minimum, we can learn from China's experience, and that entails working with them. Finally, cooperating on a fair and equal basis gives us insight into what's happening in Chinese AI research. Unlike China, which has decades of experience observing what the world is doing, the United States has no sustained national effort to monitor China's AI development, owing in part to the hubris we've acquired for being on top for too long. Those days are no longer with us, and fixing the problem is long overdue. So even if one's goal is collaboration for safety's sake, how can the United States know where the dangers lie, not to mention defend its own interests, if we have no good idea what China is doing? So I recognize some of these remarks are unsettling, but I think realism is a better foundation for navigating the difficult times we will soon be facing. Thank you.
Thank you, William. That was a little bit unsettling, but I do recognize we need a realist on this panel to maybe counterbalance my idealist bent. And I do agree with a lot of your reflections, and I think that it's good that we get straight to the point. So my role as the guided panel guide here will end, and I now hand it over to the general discussion question section. We have a series of questions here. Do any of the panelists want to have a crack at them? How would we prefer to proceed? William, I think you're muted.
I was muted. Thank you. Question one, the standard and kind of obvious answer to that question, how could the U.S. and China remain competitive in AI innovation while still finding common ground for collaboration? Well, I mean, AI is huge. It's enormous. It's not a technology. It involves many, many technologies. There's a lot going on, as we've already pointed out. But the one common ground that I think everybody agrees, and certainly Chinese scientists agree too, is the need for safety. No one wants to eradicate humanity or degrade the quality of life. So, if you want to collaborate, that's a great place to start doing it. In terms of how you remain competitive at the same time, well, you render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, and give God give God his due as well. You collaborate on issues of common concern and safety, and you keep your IP bottled up to the extent that you can. But I want to say one other point about safety. In Chinese, the word for safety, anquan, also means security. And it's a fused concept. It's one and the same thing. And it's really difficult to know when you hear this word anquan, whether Chinese are talking in terms of the safety that, as we understand it, preventing a cataclysmic event, as opposed to security, and that's the health and wealth of the state itself. So this is something, as we all collectively move forward toward this goal of safety, we're going to want to keep this potential dichotomy in sight.
I just to add, I think an area of collaboration that's already happening is in the auto sector, where especially European automakers are already heavily collaborating with China, and this will extend to autonomous vehicles. And Mercedes-Benz reportedly is going to use lidar from Chinese company, and a lot of Chinese technology is already being incorporated into cars. So when it comes to using AI for this autonomous driving, I think that is one area where there will be collaboration. And just secondly, to pick up on an earlier point that Bill made, that for years China has the West has willingly and sometimes unwillingly given technology to China. Now in many areas such as clean energy, China is the center of innovation. And the interesting thing we see is reports recently of China actually, or Xi Jinping becoming concerned about Chinese companies going overseas to Europe or to Mexico and taking the technology and potentially transferring the technology. And I think the West, Europe especially, needs to hold firm and say, well, look, you did the same thing. If you want to come to the European market, there's got to be some element of transferring the technology, transferring the skills to Europe. We got to play the same playbook, I think, and be firm about that.
I can add
I have a question
bit.
for. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
Sure, I can add a little bit to that comment. You view this issue historically at the end of the Second World War, and then later, Japan and Korea followed the same. South Korea followed the same playbook, and most of the venues and techniques that China has used to extract foreign technology were actually pioneered by those two countries. And they gave it up eventually. They don't do nearly as much as they used to. They're much more equitable now in exchanges because they've arrived. I mean, they do cutting edge technology, and China is there now too. They're a peer competitor. We know this already in many areas. But I have to say, one difference is that while China is doing a lot of good, innovative work on their own, the old patterns are still there. We're still seeing a lot of unwanted technology transfer. So it pays us to be vigilant as we move ahead. But I do agree, and I'm beginning to hear some of my colleagues now say the same thing. That isn't it perhaps time that we started looking at what kinds of technologies China has to offer us, because it's no longer a one-way street.
Yeah, Bill, and I like how you mentioned it's time for us to kind of face our own hubris as Americans, coming from many decades of being on the top of the technological innovation pyramid, and that no longer being the case. I have a question for both of you, and so I work a lot, as you know, in United Nations, and it seems to be almost axiomatic that multilateral governance is the way forward. So I appreciate, Bill, how you started your talk by saying that might be an assumption. Do you believe that there is a path forward without multilateral organizations harmonizing in some way AI's development, particularly when it comes to some of its more pernicious safety aspects? Or is this is it impossible to have collaboration without multilateral organizations?
The question, it's not an either or thing. I mean, you can have both, and probably it will end up that way. I think you certainly do not want to discount the value that multilateral organizations will bring to the table. Collaboration for safety's sake is certainly worth doing. I agree. I'm still kind of with Nick Bostrom on this idea that at the end of the day, the shots are going to be called by whoever has the greatest technology. If you want to go get into science fiction, it may not even be our decision, to make. It could be AI is already making that decision for us, when the time comes. I see that one of the questions talks about what's going to happen 5 or 10 years from now. But the people I speak to are now talking about powerful AI, the current euphemism for artificial general intelligence, happening within a year or two. But to get back to the question, yeah, we must go forward with a multilateral approach, certainly to safety. There's no question about that. But I still think at the end of the day, whoever has the best AI is going to be the one calling the shots.
So I'm looking at the additional questions here, and there's one about government funding versus private innovation models. Henry, William, do you have any thoughts about those two models, which might be the best at achieving AGI going forward, or powerful AI, as they call it?
Bill, is probably one for you, I think.
Henry, it was addressed to you, but I'll be happy to weigh in. What the question is, what's the way to go? A private,
or more specifically, which way would be more conducive to achieving that technological dominance through powerful AI that you discussed earlier?
Yeah. I'm smiling not at the question. I'm smiling. Ironically, one of the reviewers of a recent paper we just published on China AGI actually chided us for not emphasizing strongly enough that China has an enormous advantage by virtue of the fact that it doesn't make a clear-cut distinction between private and public funding. There are public goals backed by public funds, which to a greater extent influence how technologies are developed in China, and we just don't have that here in the United States. I'm not going to discount the work of the national labs, DARPA. They're doing great things, but compared to China, I don't think the scales match. You mentioned idealism. I used to be a laissez-faire capitalist. I'm not anymore. I find myself thinking more and more about how Bismarck turned Germany around back in that day. So, I think there is a role for industrial policy in the United States. It's a dirty word. It used to be anyway. Less dirty now today. But I think if we're going to be realistic about the competition and how we need to move forward, we have to take this into account and seek private-public alliance, for this technology.
Yeah, so I'd agree with that. I think the West has kind of, over the last few years, has kind of reawakened to industrial policy, but hasn't really been quite clear on exactly how to do it and how much money to throw at these industries. And we have systems that can't tolerate, I don't think, the same scale of failure that you can within the Chinese system, because we'd have backlash, right? And I think that's already the case in clean energy, where you see the narrative now about, it's all a green boondog or whatever. So I think the Chinese system can throw more money without risk of a big backlash. But the downside of the Chinese system, we've seen, with Alibaba now is back on top and in favor, but it was quite a chill for a time where Jack Ma fell out of favor and the share price crashed. One of the big questions now is it that Xi Jinping's content that he's got them under control? But that fear, how much does that hinder innovation? That fear of another chill, another falling out of favor. And really, when we look at Xi Jinping's writings, his thoughts, he is a proponent of state control. He's not all about private enterprise. Maybe now he's had to bend a little because of the economic situation, but I think his thoughts show that he's not that in favor of private companies amassing huge amounts of power. And so I think both countries and both systems have their advantages and disadvantages, but we could probably learn a bit more from the Chinese industrial policy the state setting clear goals, clear policies, and maintaining policies. I think, again, just clean energy where I focus, like the disruption in US policy, right? We have tax credits and then they might be abolished. And then, this goes all the way back to, 1970s where we saw a lot of tax credits for renewable energy. Then Reagan got rid of them. So, but if you don't have certainty, it's very hard as investors, as companies to kind of to go into new areas, to really invest money in new areas. So I think both systems can learn a bit from each other.
I couldn't agree more. One of my major complaints is that I mentioned it. We seem to be fixated in the West on these large language models when that's not the only way to AI. The advantage, I think, to having some kind of, I don't want to use the word oversight, but getting government involved, in AI development. You see it in China. I guess 2 weeks ago, my colleague and I attended a high-level gathering. It was put together by one of the U.S. government agencies. All the important companies were there. I mean, Anthropic was there, OpenAI was there, and they spoke for 2 hours about the future of AI. And every single thing they said concerned large language models. They were using that one technique, that one technology, as a synonym for AI. That's not how it's done in China. We read government proclamations from national, state, provincial levels, and whatnot, and they all pretty much reiterate the same thing. And that's, yes, the large models are an area of concern, but in addition to that, we must also develop X, Y, and Z. And I don't hear that here in the United States. I think we're making a big mistake by putting all of our eggs in one basket. And I have to admire China for their broader approach to artificial intelligence, much of which is determined by government policy, which we so far have lacked here.
Yeah, that might be one of the side effects of laissez-faire capitalism, which is much more cyclical in terms of fads. We know that the venture capital model tends to follow certain unicorns, as they call them, and then everything else falls by the wayside. I'd like to have a crack at this question here. The broader big power competition and the geopolitical issues. The main aspect that I see in terms of whether we call it AGI or supercomputing or powerful computers, is that it's going to be a game changer around economic productivity. I mentioned at the beginning, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm interested in how different aspects of the human experience connect, and we still haven't grappled with the potential boom that is going to happen. As I'm doing a lot of research on AI agents and how they've increased productivity in different sectors. The immense productivity boom is going to have repercussions in terms of the military capabilities. And the military capabilities are then in turn going to drive the geopolitical rivalry. It's a historical fact that if one nation develops the composite bow, then all of a sudden the Mongols are taking over the Islamic Empire. So there's a direct connection there between the technological innovation and geopolitical realities. So I'd like to end this section because I'm getting messages that we have to turn it over to the Q&A with an invitation for us to think about how these different aspects all connect: technological innovation, the military capabilities, and geopolitical equilibriums. So I suppose I'll just continue as the host here, and I'll take a question from Emily, which she posted a full 23 minutes ago. Do you foresee any areas where U.S. and Chinese AI companies might collaborate despite rising tensions, or is the landscape shifting toward complete decoupling?
So is this for any of the three of us to respond to, or?
Yep, it's for any of the three of us to respond to, and I think we touched on it in some aspects.
We did,
but
yeah. Well, we did. I think no one disagreed about the compelling need to cooperate in terms of safety protocols. And there's some broad agreement among Chinese scientists too. That this is something that needs to be done. To be totally cynical, you could discount it as another effort by China to get their foot in the door, but that scenario doesn't make any sense anymore because China's already doing cutting edge research in these areas. Their foot's already in the door, and pretty soon they're going to be owning the whole door, the whole room. But there's legitimate concern about what runaway AI could do. Even less than that, other kinds of harms that we're already experiencing right now, need to be mitigated, and it's best to do that at a global level, which I'm all in favor of pursuing.
I would take issue with the last word here, complete decoupling. Emily, I don't see that as possible. There's too many ways in which these technologies intermesh across borders that, from my perspective, it's going to be quite difficult for any one government, even if they wanted to provide a decoupling. It also speaks to the way that AI works. It's more like as many of you know, it's more like a puzzle with many different AI parts that come together. There's no one software. There's foundational models that feed into other emanations that are all, and so much of this is actually public and free and accessible. That for those that do work in AI, they know that it's very hard to put boundaries around this sort of thing. And then when you add to that the fact that the markets are also very fluid. I was talking about how it's all about reaching scale. So it's very difficult for a company to not scale and continue innovating. So I think that complete decoupling is impossible, even if misguided policymakers would try to achieve it. So there's more questions. I'll move on to Fiona. Fiona asks, how do you see Deepseek's advancements in AI shifting the balance of power in the global AI race between US and China?
So the seminar that I referred to a few minutes ago that my colleague and I attended, one of the main points that came out was the advantages that Deepseek has gained, by open sourcing their product, making it available. The source code, I think I'm right about that, available for experimentation and development, and also making the application, the program, freely available. So that they're looking at market share, and they're succeeding in doing that. It's kind of interesting. As I mentioned, this meeting I was at was attended by OpenAI and Anthropic, which are offering products, for a cost that more than I can pay, fee-bearing products, and they were moaning about how open sourcing the software is a security risk, and there's some merit to that argument. It makes these technologies available to people of nefarious intent and so on and so forth. But the point is, it also makes it available to everybody else in the world. And I think Deepseek stole a march on everybody by doing that. It was a very clever move on their part.
Agreed. I think the next question is perfect for Henry. Henry, we have a question from Anonymous. How do differences in AI regulation and governance between the US and China impact multinational tech companies operating in both markets, and what strategies can businesses use to navigate these challenges?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I wonder how much we know yet about AI regulation and governance. It still seems I mean, Bill will know more, but it still seems early days, right? And it seems unclear what that's going to be. I think, as I say, companies that I know, auto companies, etc., operating in both markets, I think it will be a challenge, right? And we've already seen, not complete decoupling, but we've already seen multinationals struggle to deal with the world. I guess since the first Trump administration of de-risking or efforts at decoupling, right, makes it very challenging to operate in these different markets. It's interesting, the open source nature of Deepseek, etc. It is quite counter to what we would expect of China, right? And I wonder, when it comes to AI, whether China will revert to its traditional, attitude of seeing, sees the internet as part of its sovereign territory and try to keep foreign companies out. If you look at the way the internet developed in China and the way they, got rid of Google and et cetera, I wonder, that will how they will look at foreign companies using AI.
This dichotomy between governance and the lack of, it's interesting. The larger companies that already have mature foundational models, they're already where they want to be and are in favor of governance. Those who are not quite far along the path, are talking about the need for lack of regulation, so that they can compete against the established companies. But the one issue that doesn't get talked about as much as it should is, okay, so you want to have some kind of governance, but it's not the government doing the governing. It's the government relying on the companies that have the technological wherewithal and understanding of what's going on, or doing the governing, which is to say, you're putting the fox in charge of the hen house. So that's a conundrum that I haven't been able to get my arms around. I don't know how to solve that problem.
We have another question. Looking at the future, do you think AI will drive the US and China further apart, leading to an AI Cold War? Or is there a realistic path toward cooperative AI development that would benefit both nations? I guess I'll try answering that. I think we need to separate different applications. For example, military applications versus, for example, AI agents, as I spoke about earlier, or how AI is used in social media and the way it changes the way that the populations can converse. There's different levels, and of course, the military level is the one that is going to be the most secretive and the most closely held. However, what we're looking at here is the possibility of a game changer technology when it comes to military advantage. I briefly mentioned quantum computing. Some people think it's very far away. Some people think it's close. Microsoft thinks they've got it, and the way that this will change the geopolitical balance is quite profound. So in that sense, whoever does achieve, whether we want to call it supercomputing, quantum computing, and there's different ways to look at this, but whoever achieves a material transformation in the way that AI can be used by their militaries, and there's many different applications. Quantum, for example, quantum cryptography. It would make it impossible to, for example, identify where different nations have their submarines located throughout the world's oceans. And this is a material game changer, because at that point, then it becomes, as William said earlier, there's one winner, and there's no longer a competition. It's no longer, as they like to say, having fun to having fun. There is a clear winner and a clear loser. And in that sense, I don't believe that there's any potential cooperation once that scenario unfolds. However, at other levels, for example, at the level of just the commercial level, that's there's a different speed and a different there's a different type of stakes involved. So I think that it's important to analyze these different levels when trying to answer your question. Jason D has a question. With China heavily investing in AI-driven surveillance and the U.S. focusing on AI for economic growth and defense, how do these differing priorities shape the global narrative on AI ethics? I'm glad we finally touched on surveillance with 6 minutes left to go in our session.
Oh wow!
There's William, you want to answer that question maybe?
Of course, it's a big issue. So we have been surveilling the surveillors, for a while now. I mean, China's one of the motivating factors for China getting into AI, was indeed to enhance their ability to surveil. I don't like to point this out, but it's the evidence is pretty solid. We know who the movers and shakers are in that world, and have been paying attention to it. So that's a big factor in what motivates China to go forward with AI. And we're seeing something that's even a little more scary than that, looming potentially on the horizon. And this also applies to the last question that we had too. It's not just a case of one kind of AI. I mean, China has been talking. The scientists who are running the show in China now, the AI show, are talking about, not surprisingly, AI with Chinese characteristics. You've heard that phrase before a million times. They're serious about it. And one of the distinctions between our approach to artificial general intelligence and that of people who seem to be in the ascendancy right now in China is, again, we're trying to expand our large models. China's looking at it. They're doing the same, but they're also trying to embody these large models in real environments. It's already happening in one large Chinese city. The idea is to test it there and move it to the rest of the country. But one of the things that is characteristic of this effort is they wish to embed values. That's their word, jiaji, values, in the AI to serve as guardrails. In other words, they want to do it from the inside out, not the outside in, so that the AI that develops, it seeks knowledge that is not detrimental to the health and welfare of the people as defined by the state. So you've got beyond just surveilling the people. If you've got AI that is designed from the get-go to move to ensure the survival of the regime's values, you've got something that's potentially far worse than just surveillance. You've got a really dystopian AI society. Now, it may not come to that, but that seems to be the direction that at least some of the people are moving it in. I don't see that happening in the United States, but I might be blind to what's happening here as well.
Well, in the West, the conversation is around alignment and making sure that AI is aligned with our values. But I think you're right. There's a fundamental inversion of the direction from which this alignment or these values should come from. And in China, that direction is from the state to the AI models. In the West, perhaps because of our liberal tradition, it should come from the citizenry. Now, how that is articulated through what institutions, whether it's the private sector, whether we put up institutions, that's all for us to find out in the decades to come. But I think the issue of AI ethics is not an issue of ethics per se, but it's an issue of what are the groups of people that are involved in selecting those parameters that the AI works under. Yeah. So we're arriving close to the end of our session, and we have 2 minutes left. I don't know if the organizers want to jump in, or shall we thank the organizers for this opportunity to have this conversation, or maybe we have another minute left if anybody has some questions from the audience. All right, so no more questions. Just a thank you from World Salon organizers, which I will challenge here. And we've been invited to go backstage, William and Henry. So thank you to everybody who's listening, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Goodbye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.